Marcus stepped deeper into the storage unit, the musty air thick with decades of secrets. The evidence wall stretched from floor to ceiling, a detective's fever dream organized with military precision. Red string connected photographs to police reports, creating a spider web of connections that made his forensic accounting brain itch with recognition. This wasn't the random hoarding of a broken cop. This was methodology. His phone buzzed. Emma's ringtone, the frozen theme song that used to make Sarah laugh until tears ran down her cheeks. "Daddy? Mrs. Rodriguez says you went treasure hunting." Emma's voice carried that forced cheer she'd perfected since the diagnosis, bright and brittle as spun glass. "Something like that, sweetheart." Marcus pulled the phone away to clear his throat. "How are you feeling?" "Tired, but the good kind, like after swimming. Remember when we used to go to the community pool? Before the medical bills, before he'd sold everything they owned, including Emma's college fund, before neighbors started leaving casseroles with pitying smiles because everyone knew the Chen family was drowning." "I remember." Marcus touched a photograph pinned to the wall, a young woman with dark hair, Emma's age when the picture was taken. The crime scene photos surrounding it told a story he didn't want to read. "Listen, Bug, Daddy might be late tonight. Can you have Mrs. Rodriguez heat up that soup? The good soup or the medicine soup?" Marcus closed his eyes. Emma called it medicine soup because the special nutritional supplements Dr. Hernandez prescribed tasted like chalk mixed with hope. Insurance had stopped covering them last month. "The good soup tonight. Okay. I love you, Daddy. Love you too, Bug." The line went dead, leaving Marcus alone with Detective Walsh's ghosts. He'd come here expecting vintage furniture, maybe some collectibles he could flip on eBay. Instead, he'd bought 25 years of obsession for exactly the amount he needed to keep his daughter alive. The irony wasn't lost on him. As a forensic accountant, Marcus had spent 15 years following paper trails, uncovering financial crimes that destroyed families. He understood obsession, the way numbers could tell stories that people tried to bury, but he'd been good at it, good enough to make partner at Brennan and Associates before the world fell apart. Cancer first. Sarah's diagnosis had come on a Tuesday, delivered by an oncologist who spoke in statistics while their world imploded. 18 months of experimental treatments that insurance wouldn't cover, watching his brilliant wife fade, while Emma learned words like chemotherapy and remission instead of multiplication tables. Then the layoffs. Brennan and Associates had downsized during Sarah's final months, eliminating the forensic accounting division. Marcus had been too distracted to see it coming, too focused on finding hope in medical journals to notice his own career flatline. Sarah died on a Sunday morning in spring, holding Emma's hand and making Marcus promise to never give up fighting for their daughter. 3 months later, Emma collapsed at school. The same monster that had taken her mother was growing in her blood. Now Marcus stood in a dead detective's storage unit, surrounded by evidence of another kind of monster entirely. The photographs showed crime scenes from California, Nevada, Arizona, all young women, all with the same distinctive injuries. Walsh had tracked the killer's movement across 3 states, documented a pattern the official investigations had missed. A manila folder marked urgent, Dr. Elizabeth Santos caught his attention. Inside, Marcus found medical records, research notes, and correspondence between Detective Walsh and someone at Helix Biomedical, the same company producing Emma's experimental treatment. His hands shook as he read Dr. Santos's handwriting. Blood samples show unusual markers consistent with exposure to engineered pathogen. Recommend immediate investigation of genetic modification research, particularly work done by Helix subsidiaries 1995 to 1999. The storage unit suddenly felt smaller, the walls closing in like a trap. Marcus had bid on random abandoned property and discovered a connection between a serial killer and his daughter's medical treatment. It was impossible. Coincidence. But 15 years of forensic investigation had taught him that coincidences usually weren't. His phone rang again, Dr. Hernandez's office. Marcus stared at the caller ID, knowing what they wanted. Emma's next appointment was Thursday. Payment was due in advance. "Mr. Chen, this is Jessica from Dr. Hernandez's office. I'm calling about Thursday's appointment." Marcus looked at the evidence wall, at Detective Walsh's life work abandoned to storage auction vultures and desperate fathers. Somewhere in this organized chaos was the truth about a killer who'd vanished for 25 years. Somewhere in these files might be answers about why his daughter was dying. "Mr. Chen, are you there?" The $10,000 in his pocket felt heavier than the hammer he swung every day, building other people's dreams while his own crumbled. He could walk away right now, leave Walsh's ghosts undisturbed, and buy Emma another month of hope. Or he could stay and discover why a dead detective had been investigating the company that might save his daughter's life. "I'll call you back," Marcus said, and stepped deeper into the darkness. Marcus drove home through Bakersfield's industrial maze, the setting sun painting the oil derricks and strip malls in shades of rust and exhaustion. The storage unit key felt hot in his pocket, Detective Walsh's secrets burning through him like acid. Every red light gave him time to think, and thinking was dangerous territory these days. His phone buzzed with a text from Pete Morales, tomorrow's job pushed to 8 a.m. Riverside renovation. "Bring your own lunch." Marcus typed back a thumbs-up emoji, though Pete's construction crew was the last thing on his mind. 6 months ago, he'd been analyzing complex financial statements in climate-controlled offices. Now he framed walls and installed drywall for $12 an hour, his soft accountant hands split and scarred from work that paid just enough to keep the lights on. The irony cut deep. He'd spent 15 years tracking money through corporate labyrinths, but couldn't track his way out of poverty. Sarah used to joke that he could find a needle in a haystack if the needle had left a paper trail. Now the needle was hope, and the haystack was a medical system designed to bankrupt families like his. Mrs. Rodriguez was waiting on his front porch, her weathered face creased with the kind of worry that came from raising 5 kids in neighborhoods where hope was a luxury. She'd been watching Emma for free since Marcus started construction work, claiming she enjoyed the company. But Marcus knew charity when he saw it, and the knowledge scraped his pride raw. "How is she?" Marcus asked, climbing the cracked concrete steps of the duplex he rented for $800 a month. Paint peeled from the siding like old scabs, and the front door stuck in the humid evening air. Quiet today. Did her homework, took her medicine. Mrs. Rodriguez handed him a container of rice and beans. "She asked about you a lot, when you'd be back if you found anything good." Marcus accepted the food with gratitude that tasted like shame. "Thank you, Elena. I don't know what we'd do." "Mijo, you don't thank family." She squeezed his arm with surprising strength. "That girl in there, she's fighting a war. You're fighting it with her. The rest is just details." Inside, Emma sat at the kitchen table with her homework spread across the scarred surface, her small frame dwarfed by Sarah's old UCLA sweatshirt. She'd lost more weight, the treatment stealing her appetite along with her energy, but her eyes still held that fierce intelligence that reminded Marcus so painfully of her mother. "Hey, Bug, how was school?" "Good. Mrs. Patterson taught us about compound interest today." Emma looked up from her math worksheet, pencil poised like a tiny sword. "She said it's how rich people get richer, but also how debt gets bigger." "Are we in debt, Daddy?" The question hit like a physical blow. Emma was 8 years old and calculating their financial destruction with the same methodical approach Sarah had used for everything. Too smart for her own good, just like her mother. "We're managing," Marcus said, the lie smooth as practiced grief. "What else did you learn?" Emma launched into a detailed explanation of fractions while Marcus heated Mrs. Rodriguez's rice and beans, trying not to think about the medical bills stacked on his nightstand, trying not to calculate how many months they had left before the house of cards collapsed entirely. After dinner, Emma curled against him on the couch while they watched Finding Nemo, her current favorite because the fish got lost but found their way home. Marcus stroked her thin hair and felt her breathing settle into the rhythm of approaching sleep. This perfect moment suspended between yesterday's loss and tomorrow's uncertainty. "Daddy?" Emma's voice was soft, already halfway to dreams. Do you think Mommy would be proud of us? Marcus closed his eyes against the surge of grief that still hit without warning after 8 months. Sarah should be here, should be the one holding their daughter through this nightmare. She should be researching treatments with her scientific mind, finding solutions that Marcus couldn't see. Every single day, bug. Every single day. Emma drifted off during the part where Dory forgets everything but keeps swimming anyway. Marcus carried her to her bedroom, Sarah's old sewing room converted with a twin bed and glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling. Emma's art covered the walls, bright crayon drawings of families and houses, and dogs they'd never been able to afford. Back in the kitchen, Marcus spread the medical bills across the table like a losing poker hand. Dr. Hernandez's office, the treatment center, prescription costs that doubled each month. The numbers told a story he knew by heart. They were drowning in increments, losing ground despite his best efforts. His laptop sat open to job listings he'd already applied for twice. Senior financial analyst, forensic accountant, corporate investigator, all requiring experience he had and references from a company that no longer existed, all paying enough to save Emma's life if he could just get someone to see past the gap in his resume. The storage unit key caught the kitchen light, Detective Walsh's legacy reduced to stamped metal. Somewhere in that evidence wall were answers to questions Marcus didn't know how to ask. Questions about Helix biomedical and experimental treatments and why a serial killer's research had led to his daughter's medicine. Marcus picked up his phone to call Dr. Hernandez's office, then set it down again. Tomorrow would bring the same impossible choice: liquidate everything for one more month of treatment, or watch Emma fade away while he built other people's dreams. But tonight, for just a few more hours, he could pretend they were managing. Marcus jolted awake at 3:17 a.m., his heart hammering against his ribs. The dream fragments scattered like smoke, Sarah's voice calling his name, Emma's hospital bracelet dissolving in his hands, Detective Walsh's evidence wall stretching into infinity. He lay still in the darkness, listening to the duplex settle around him, the familiar creaks and whispers of a building held together by paint and prayer. His phone glowed on the nightstand. 2 missed calls from an unknown number, both at 3:12 a.m. No voicemail. Marcus sat up, instantly alert. His forensic accounting instincts kicked in, the pattern recognition that had made him valuable before the world collapsed. Nobody called at 3 a.m. with good news. Nobody called 5 times in one night unless something had changed. The phone rang again. Same number, Marcus Chen. His voice was rough with sleep and caution. Silence stretched across the connection, filled with static and the distant hum of highway traffic. Then a woman's voice, careful and controlled, "You bought storage unit 247 today." Marcus's blood turned to ice water. Who is this? Someone who's been waiting 25 years for that unit to surface. The voice carried exhaustion and something else, fear, maybe, or resignation. Detective Walsh was my partner. My name is Detective Linda Santos, Phoenix PD, retired. Santos. Marcus thought of the medical files in Walsh's evidence collection, the correspondence with Dr. Elizabeth Santos at Helix Biomedical. Are you related to... My sister, Dr. Elizabeth Santos. She's dead, Mr. Chen. Has been for 24 years, 3 months and 16 days, killed by the same person Raymond was tracking. The kitchen suddenly felt airless. Marcus gripped the phone tighter, his carpenter's calluses rough against the smooth case. How did you know I bought the unit? I've been monitoring the storage facility for years, paying the owner to notify me if Unit 247 ever went to auction. Her laugh was bitter as coffee grounds. Never thought it would take this long. Never thought I'd still be alive to see it. Marcus stood, pacing the narrow space between counter and table. The medical bills rustled under his feet like autumn leaves. What do you want? To finish what Raymond started. To stop a killer who's been hunting for 2.5 decades while everyone else moved on with their lives. Santos paused, and when she spoke again, her voice carried the weight of accumulated grief. But more than that, Mr. Chen, I want to save your daughter's life." The words hit like a physical blow. Marcus steadied himself against the kitchen counter, the storage unit key digging into his palm. "What do you know about Emma?" "I know she's 8 years old. I know she has acute lymphoblastic leukemia. I know she's receiving experimental treatment from Helix Biomedical, the same company that employed my sister when she was murdered." Santos's voice sharpened, cutting through the static. "I also know that 3 other children receiving the same treatment have died in the past 6 months. Not from cancer, Mr. Chen, from complications that shouldn't exist." Marcus's knees gave out. He collapsed into the kitchen chair, Emma's math homework scattered beneath his elbows. Compound interest. How debt gets bigger. How rich people get richer while families like his drowned in increments. "You're lying." "Check the death certificates. Kevin Morrison, age 7, Phoenix. Maria Gutierrez, age 9, Las Vegas. Daniel Park, age 6, Riverside. All enrolled in the same experimental program as your daughter. All dead within 3 months of starting treatment." The phone felt heavy as lead in Marcus's hands. Through the thin walls, he could hear Emma's breathing, the soft whistle she'd developed since the treatment started. Dr. Hernandez called it a minor side effect. Nothing to worry about. What does this have to do with Detective Walsh's investigation? Everything. Santos's voice carried the weight of 2 decades spent connecting dots that others refused to see. The killer Raymond was tracking didn't just disappear 25 years ago. He evolved, found new hunting grounds, new methods. What looks like medical research to save children's lives is something else entirely. Marcus thought of the evidence wall, the meticulous organization that had made his accountant's brain itch with recognition. The photographs of young women, the timeline that stretched across 3 states, the medical files that connected Detective Walsh to Helix Biomedical and the experimental treatment keeping Emma alive. "Where are you?" Marcus asked. "Driving through Bakersfield. Should reach your address in about 15 minutes. Santos paused. "I need to see what Raymond collected. And you need to understand what you've stumbled into before it's too late for Emma." Marcus looked at the medical bills spread across his table, at the laptop screen showing job listings he'd never qualify for, at the storage unit key that had promised salvation and delivered nightmare. Tomorrow, he was supposed to call Dr. Hernandez's office, supposed to confirm Emma's Thursday appointment with money he didn't have. Instead, he was about to let a stranger into his home at 3:30 a.m. to discuss a 25-year-old murder case that somehow connected to his daughter's treatment. 15 minutes, he said, and hung up. Outside, Bakersfield slept on, unaware that Marcus Chen's ordinary world was about to shatter completely. Marcus stared at the phone for a full minute after Santos hung up, watching the screen fade to black. His reflection stared back from the dark glass, hollow-eyed, unshaven, looking like a man who'd aged 5 years in 8 months. The kind of man who bid his last $10,000 on storage units at 3 in the morning. This is insane. He pushed back from the kitchen table, the chair legs scraping against linoleum worn thin by the previous tenant's children. 15 minutes. 15 minutes to decide whether to trust a stranger who claimed his daughter's life-saving treatment was connected to a serial killer. 15 minutes to choose between hope and paranoia. Marcus walked to Emma's bedroom door, pressing his ear against the wood. Her breathing had the slight wheeze that Dr. Hernandez insisted was temporary, just her body adjusting to the new medication protocol. But now Santos's words echoed in his mind, complications that shouldn't exist. 3 other children, dead. He eased the door open, watching Emma sleep in the glow of plastic stars Sarah had stuck to the ceiling during those final weeks. She looked impossibly small beneath her Finding Nemo comforter, one thin arm clutching the stuffed elephant Marcus had bought her first day of treatment. Her face was peaceful, unmarked by the fear that had become his constant companion. What if Santos is wrong? The thought offered momentary relief. What if she's just another conspiracy theorist, another broken person clinging to patterns that don't exist? But Marcus's forensic training wouldn't let him dismiss the connections. Detective Walsh's meticulous evidence organization, The medical files linking a murder investigation to Helix Biomedical. Santos, knowing about Emma's treatment, her exact diagnosis, details that should be protected by patient privacy laws. Someone had been watching them. Marcus closed Emma's door and returned to the kitchen, his carpenter's hands shaking as he gathered the medical bills. 47,000 in debt and climbing. Emma's Thursday appointment would cost another 8,000. Money he'd planned to get from selling whatever treasures Walsh had hoarded. Instead, he'd found evidence of something that made his daughter's cancer look simple by comparison. His phone buzzed. Text message from unknown number, 2 minutes out. White Honda Accord. Don't wake your daughter. Marcus's blood chilled. Santos knew where he lived, knew about Emma, knew enough about their situation to find them in the middle of the night. Either she was telling the truth about watching the storage facility, or she'd been watching much more than that. He moved to the front window, peering through blinds that Sarah had hung during happier times. The street looked normal, Mrs. Rodriguez's house dark, the Kaminsky's truck parked at its usual crooked angle, the streetlight casting familiar shadows across cracked asphalt. But normal was what Marcus had thought about his life yesterday morning. Normal was the luxury of believing his biggest problem was money. Headlights turned onto his street, moving slowly past the sleeping houses. A white Honda Accord, exactly as promised. The car pulled to the curb 3 houses down, close enough to walk, far enough to avoid attracting attention from neighbors who might remember strangers visiting at 3:30 a.m. Marcus watched a figure emerge from the driver's side. Medium height, grey hair pulled back, moving with the careful precision of someone whose body had seen too many years of stress. Detective Linda Santos, if that's who she really was, if any of this was real. She approached his front door without hesitation, her footsteps silent on the cracked walkway. No knock, no doorbell, just the soft scratch of fingernails against wood, a sound that wouldn't carry to Emma's room or wake the neighbors. Marcus opened the door before Santos could knock again. She was smaller than he'd expected, maybe 5'6", with pale eyes that seemed to catalogue every detail of his face in seconds. She wore jeans and a jacket that couldn't quite hide the slight bulge of a concealed weapon. "Mr. Chen." She stepped past him without invitation, scanning the living room with professional thoroughness. "We need to talk." "Emma's sleeping." Marcus closed the door, engaging the deadbolt Sarah had insisted on after too many late-night crime reports. "Whatever you think you know. I know your wife died of ovarian cancer 8 months ago. I know you lost your job at Brennan and Associates 3 weeks before her death. I know you're working construction for Pete Morales, living paycheck to paycheck while your daughter receives experimental treatment that costs more than most people make in a year." Santos turned to face him, and Marcus saw something in her expression that stopped his protest cold. Not smugness or satisfaction at demonstrating her knowledge, sympathy, understanding, the look of someone who'd lost everything and survived anyway. "I also know," Santos continued quietly, "that you're scared, that you bid your last 10,000 on that storage unit because you're desperate enough to gamble everything on hope, and that right now you're wondering if trusting me will save Emma's life or destroy it." Marcus sagged against the door, the fight draining out of him like water through broken pipes. "Tell me about the other children." Santos moved to the kitchen table, her trained eyes taking in the scattered medical bills, the laptop screen showing job listings, the evidence of a life balanced on the edge of collapse. She pulled out a chair without asking permission, the gesture of someone accustomed to making herself at home in other people's disasters. "Kevin Morrison was the first," she said, settling into Sarah's old chair like she belonged there. 7 years old, diagnosed with the same type of leukemia as Emma. His parents were like you, middle-class family destroyed by medical costs, desperate enough to try anything. Marcus remained standing, his back pressed against the door, as if he could still retreat from this conversation. "How did they find the experimental treatment?" "Same way you did. Dr. Hernandez's recommendation. Helix Biomedical's outreach program for families who'd exhausted traditional options." Santos's voice carried the flat precision of someone reciting facts she'd memorized through repetition and pain. Kevin showed remarkable improvement for 6 weeks. Tumor markers dropped, energy returned. His parents thought they'd found a miracle. The kitchen felt too small, the walls pressing closer with each word. Marcus thought of Emma's last checkup, Dr. Hernandez's cautious optimism about her blood work improving ahead of schedule. Remarkable progress for such an aggressive case. What happened to him? Complications that shouldn't exist. Santos pulled out her phone, scrolling through files with practiced efficiency. Sudden organ failure, brain hemorrhaging, the kind of symptoms you'd see in advanced poisoning, not cancer treatment. He died in Phoenix Children's Hospital while his parents watched the miracle turn into a nightmare. Marcus's carpenter hands gripped the door handle until his knuckles went white. The other children? Maria Gutierrez in Las Vegas, 9 years old, similar diagnosis, similar timeline. Showed improvement for 2 months before sudden cardiac arrest. No family history of heart problems, no warning signs. Santos looked up from her phone, pale eyes reflecting the kitchen light. Daniel Park in Riverside died 3 weeks ago. His parents are still fighting the hospital to release his complete medical records. The numbers clicked into place with the same mechanical precision that had made Marcus valuable as a forensic accountant. 3 children, 3 cities, 3 families destroyed by hope that curdled into loss. Emma would be number 4. You think someone's killing these kids? I think my sister discovered something 25 years ago that got her murdered. I think Raymond Walsh continued her research until he disappeared. And I think whoever killed them both has spent the last quarter century perfecting their methods. Santos stood, moving closer until Marcus could see the fine lines around her eyes, the weight of decades spent carrying impossible knowledge. The question is whether you're brave enough to help me prove it before Emma becomes another statistic. Marcus pushed away from the door, pacing the narrow kitchen like a caged animal. Everything in his world had been about keeping Emma alive, about finding money for treatments and maintaining hope when the medical bills buried them deeper each month. Now Santos was suggesting that the very treatment saving his daughter's life might be designed to kill her. This is insane. You're talking about a conspiracy involving doctors, medical companies, families who've lost children. I'm talking about a serial killer who evolved. Santos's voice cut through his protest like surgical steel. Someone who learned that hunting individual victims was inefficient. Someone who discovered that medical research provides perfect cover for experimentation on the most vulnerable population. Marcus stopped pacing, his mind processing connections he didn't want to see. Detective Walsh's evidence wall, the timeline spanning 3 states, the medical files that linked murder investigations to cutting-edge research, the methodical organization that had triggered his pattern recognition training. Why should I believe you? Santos reached into her jacket, and Marcus tensed, but she only pulled out a manila folder, worn thin from years of handling. Because 25 years ago, my sister Dr. Elizabeth Santos was developing revolutionary cancer treatments for children. Because she discovered that someone was using her research to conduct unauthorized human experiments. And because the night she planned to expose them, she was found dead in her apartment with evidence of the same complications that killed Kevin Morrison. She placed the folder on the kitchen table between Emma's homework and the medical bills. Raymond Walsh was the detective assigned to her case. He didn't believe the official ruling of accidental death any more than I did. He spent the rest of his career building a case that no one wanted to hear. Marcus stared at the folder, understanding that opening it would change everything. Yesterday, his biggest problem had been finding $10,000 for Emma's next treatment cycle. Now he faced the possibility that the treatment itself was the real threat. From Emma's bedroom came the soft sound of her breathing, punctuated by that slight wheeze Dr. Hernandez called temporary. 3 other children had probably made the same sound before their miracles turned deadly. Marcus reached for the folder, his fingers trembling as they closed around evidence that would either save his daughter's life or destroy the last hope he had left. There was no going back now. only forward into whatever truth Detective Walsh had died protecting. The threshold between his old life and whatever came next disappeared the moment he opened Santos's file. The folder opened like a door to hell. The first photograph showed a woman who looked startlingly like Santos. Same pale eyes, same determined jawline, but younger, untouched by decades of grief. Dr. Elizabeth Santos smiled from what appeared to be a hospital ID photo, her white coat pristine, hope radiating from her expression like light. The second photograph showed the same woman on a steel autopsy table, her skin mottled with the distinctive hemorrhaging markers now recognized from Santos's description of the children's deaths. Jesus! Marcus pushed back from the table, his chair scraping against linoleum. You carry this around? Every day for 25 years. Santos's voice was steady, but her hands trembled slightly as she turned to the next page. Elizabeth was 34 when she died. Brilliant researcher, completely dedicated to saving children's lives. She'd developed a new protocol that showed unprecedented success rates in preliminary trials. Marcus forced himself to look at the autopsy report, his forensic training automatically cataloguing details. Cause of death listed as complications from a pre-existing condition, but the symptoms described didn't match the conclusion. Brain hemorrhaging, organ failure, cellular breakdown that suggested systematic poisoning rather than natural causes. The police bought this? The police were told to buy it. Santos flipped through pages of official reports, witness statements, medical examiner findings. Elizabeth's research was funded by grants worth millions of dollars. Her death meant those grants transferred to other researchers, other institutions. Too much money involved for anyone to ask uncomfortable questions. The next section contained photocopies of Elizabeth Santos's personal notes, handwritten pages that grew increasingly frantic as the dates progressed. Marcus read over her shoulder, his accountant's mind automatically organizing the information into patterns. June 15th, protocol showing 94% success rate in preliminary trials. Board wants to accelerate timeline. June 18th, requested access to previous trial data. Dr. Hendricks refused, citing proprietary concerns. June 22nd, something wrong with earlier trials. Patient files don't match reported outcomes. June 25th, found discrepancies in death certificates. At least 12 children died during initial trials. Cause of death listings inconsistent with medical evidence. June 28th, board meeting tomorrow. Plan to present findings, recommend suspension of trials pending investigation. June 29th, they know, I know. Someone searched my apartment, my lab, moving evidence to secure location. June 30th, final entry. She died that night, Santos said quietly. Found dead in her apartment the next morning. All her research files had been cleaned out, her computer hard drive wiped. The only evidence that survived was what she'd hidden off-site. Marcus turned the page and found Detective Raymond Walsh's first report on the case. The handwriting was precise, methodical, each observation documented with the thoroughness Marcus remembered from the storage unit evidence wall. July 2nd. Scene inconsistent with natural death. No signs of struggle, but victim's apartment showed evidence of systematic search. Missing items include all professional research materials, personal computer, appointment calendar. July 5th. Medical examiner's report conflicts with physical evidence at scene, requesting second autopsy. July 8th. Second autopsy request denied by department. Case transferred to Detective Morrison. Ordered to close investigation. July 10th, case officially closed. Cause of death, complications from pre-existing cardiac condition, no evidence of foul play. July 12th, continuing investigation on personal time. Something here worth killing for. Walsh spent the rest of his career tracking the connections, Santos explained, watching Marcus read through 25 years of accumulated evidence. Every time a child died during experimental treatment, he investigated. Every time research funding shifted between institutions, he followed the money trail. Every time a promising researcher died under suspicious circumstances, he added them to his files. Marcus found Walsh's master timeline, a document that stretched across multiple pages and connected dozens of deaths across 3 states. Children like Emma, researchers like Elizabeth Santos, even investigators who'd asked too many questions, all linked by experimental medical treatments that promised miracles and delivered death. Marcus struggled to find words adequate for the scope of what he was seeing. This is massive. How many people are involved? That's what we need to figure out. Santos pulled out a current photograph, this one showing a gleaming medical facility with Helix Biomedical spelled out in steel letters across its facade. Elizabeth's research was eventually acquired by Helix through a series of shell companies and grant transfers. The same protocol that killed her is what's keeping Emma alive. Marcus stared at the photograph, recognizing the building from Emma's medical files. He'd driven past it dozens of times, grateful for the company's willingness to provide experimental treatment to families who couldn't afford traditional options. Now it looked sinister, predatory. What do you want from me? Help finishing what Raymond started. Santos gathered the photographs, but left Elizabeth's research notes spread across the table. I need someone who understands financial investigations, who can follow money trails and connect corporate structures. Someone with enough at stake to see this through. Marcus looked toward Emma's bedroom where his daughter slept peacefully under plastic stars, trusting him to keep her safe. 3 other children had died. Their parents had probably sat in kitchens like this one, faced with impossible choices between hope and fear. And if you're wrong? If we destroy the one thing keeping her alive? Santos met his eyes with the steady gaze of someone who'd already lost everything that mattered. Then we'll have failed together. But if we do nothing, Emma dies anyway, just like the others. The kitchen fell silent except for the steady hum of the refrigerator and Emma's soft breathing from down the hall. Marcus stared at Elizabeth Santos's research notes, the handwritten words blurring as exhaustion and terror fought for control of his mind. 25 years of evidence spread across his kitchen table like pieces of a puzzle he'd never wanted to solve. I need to think about this, he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. Santos nodded, already gathering the photographs back into their folder. You have until tomorrow night. Emma's next treatment is scheduled for Wednesday morning. I checked her medical file. You what? Marcus jerked upright, the fog of shock evaporating into sharp anger. How the hell did you access her medical records? The same way I accessed everything else. Santos's calm didn't waver. Financial records, employment history, insurance claims. When you've spent 25 years investigating a conspiracy, you learn to navigate systems that aren't supposed to be navigated. Marcus thought about the storage unit, about Detective Walsh's methodical evidence wall and the organizational system that had impressed even his forensic training. You've been doing this alone for 25 years? Not alone. Not at first. Santos closed the folder but didn't put it away, her fingers tracing the worn edges. Raymond Walsh and I worked together for almost a decade after Elizabeth's death, shared information, coordinated investigations across jurisdictions. He was the only cop who believed me. What happened to him? He got too close. Santos's voice carried the weight of another loss, another failure she'd carried for decades. Found the connection between Helix Biomedical and the original research grants. Had names, dates, financial transfers that proved the conspiracy reached into federal agencies. He was supposed to meet me with the evidence. Marcus waited, but Santos had gone quiet, staring past him toward Emma's bedroom door. When she spoke again, her voice was hollow. They found his car at the bottom of Lake Isabella. Single vehicle accident, no witnesses. But Raymond was the most careful driver I'd ever known. Never took risks, always wore his seatbelt. The kind of man who checked his mirrors every 30 seconds. The storage unit, Marcus said, understanding flooding through him. He was preparing for something like that. Raymond knew they were closing in. He'd been documenting everything, creating backups, preparing evidence packages that could survive without him. Santos looked directly at Marcus. He chose that storage facility because he knew about you, former forensic accountant, living paycheck to paycheck, desperate enough to bid on abandoned units. Someone with the skills to understand his evidence and the motivation to use it. The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. He planned this? Walsh knew my daughter would get sick. He knew that experimental treatments target specific demographics. Families with sick children, no insurance, no options. Families like yours. Santos's expression remained steady, but Marcus caught something else there. Guilt, maybe, or recognition of her own manipulation. He positioned evidence where it would find the right person at the right time. Marcus pushed back from the table, pacing to the kitchen window where he could see his neighbor's house, Mrs. Rodriguez's garden, the normal world that seemed increasingly distant. So what am I supposed to do? Storm into Helix Biomedical and demand answers? Call the police and tell them about a conspiracy theory backed by a dead detective's storage unit? You do what Raymond trained for. Follow the money. Santos spread out corporate documents Marcus hadn't noticed before. Financial records, grant applications, shell company filings. Helix Biomedical didn't exist 25 years ago. It was created through a series of mergers and acquisitions that consolidated research from multiple institutions. Someone orchestrated that consolidation, funneled resources and data into a single organization. Marcus found himself drawn back to the table despite his resistance, his forensic training automatically cataloging the corporate structures Santos had mapped. The documentation was thorough, professional, exactly the kind of financial trail he'd once specialized in unraveling. Emma's treatment, he said slowly, pieces clicking into place. How long before the complications start? Based on the other children's timelines. 6 to 8 weeks from initial treatment. Emma's been receiving the protocol for 5 weeks. The timeline hit Marcus like ice water. 5 weeks of hope, of watching his daughter's energy return and her appetite improve. 5 weeks of believing they'd found their miracle. Now Santos was telling him they had perhaps 3 weeks before that miracle turned deadly. If we move against Helix, if we expose this conspiracy, what happens to Emma's treatment? Santos met his eyes with the unflinching honesty of someone who'd already calculated every terrible possibility. It stops. All experimental protocols get suspended pending investigation. Emma returns to standard treatment options, which won't save her. No, they won't. Marcus sank into his chair, the impossible choice crystallizing with brutal clarity. Continue Emma's treatment and watch her die from manufactured complications, or stop the treatment and watch her die from the cancer. Either path led to the same destination: he would lose his daughter. Unless, Santos said quietly, we can find the real cure. Marcus stared at Santos across the kitchen table, the weight of her words settling like lead in his chest. The real cure? You think there's actually a legitimate treatment they're hiding? Elizabeth's original research was legitimate, revolutionary even. Santos pulled out another set of documents, these ones bearing the official letterhead of the National Cancer Institute. Look at her preliminary data, 94% success rate with no adverse side effects. That wasn't manufactured hope, Marcus. That was real. Marcus examined the research data with his trained eye for detail, comparing Elizabeth's original findings with what he'd seen in Emma's medical files. The protocols were similar but not identical. Subtle differences in dosage, timing, supplemental medications that hadn't appeared in the original trials. They modified her work, he said, understanding dawning. Changed the formula. Weaponized it. Santos's voice carried 25 years of suppressed rage. Elizabeth created a cure. Someone else turned it into a delayed action death sentence. The kitchen seemed to shrink around them as the full scope of the conspiracy became clear. Marcus thought about Dr. Hernandez's gentle explanations of Emma's treatment protocol, the careful monitoring, the gradual improvement that had seemed too good to be true. Because it was. Show me the original formula. Santos hesitated. Marcus, even if we can prove Elizabeth's research was legitimate, even if we can demonstrate that the current protocol has been deliberately corrupted, we still need to show me the formula. His voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to demanding truth from reluctant witnesses. She opened another folder, revealing pages of chemical compounds and dosage calculations in Elizabeth's precise handwriting. Marcus spread the papers beside Emma's current treatment schedule, comparing line by line. The differences jumped out like neon signs: additional compounds that served no therapeutic purpose, timing modifications that would create dangerous accumulation effects, monitoring protocols designed to miss early warning signs. "Oh my God," he whispered. "It's elegant, diabolical but elegant. Explain." Whoever modified Elizabeth's protocol understood exactly how the human body would process these compounds over time. Marcus traced the chemical pathways with his finger, his analytical mind parsing the deadly mathematics. The original formula works. The cancer cells respond and die. But the modifications create a cascade effect. The treatment becomes toxic after 6 to 8 weeks, causing the exact complications Santos described. And the families never suspect because the treatment works initially. The children improve, get stronger, show every sign of recovery. Marcus nodded, sick understanding washing over him. Until they don't. Emma's soft cough drifted from the bedroom, the same sound that had terrified him months ago and now represented hope. Temporary hope, apparently. Borrowed time purchased with his daughter's life. Can we synthesize Elizabeth's original formula? Even if we could, we'd need a laboratory, trained chemists, clinical oversight. Santos gathered the papers into neat stacks. And we'd need to do it all without alerting the people who've spent 25 years covering their tracks. Marcus stood and walked to Emma's bedroom door, watching her sleep in the spill of hallway light. Her breathing was steady, peaceful. Her complexion had improved dramatically over the past 5 weeks. She looked healthier than she had since her diagnosis, strong enough to start planning for a future he'd almost given up hope for. "Who's behind this?" he asked without turning around. That's what Raymond died trying to prove. The conspiracy reaches beyond Helix Biomedical, beyond individual researchers or corporate executives. We're talking about institutional corruption that spans federal agencies, medical licensing boards, research institutions. Marcus returned to the kitchen, decision crystallizing in his mind. Then we need to be smarter than Raymond was. Meaning? He tried to build a case that would hold up in court, follow proper procedures, work within a system that was compromised from the beginning. Marcus met Santos's eyes. "I'm not a cop. I don't need to follow those rules." Santos leaned forward. "What are you suggesting? You want the financial trail? I'll get you the financial trail, but not through official channels, not with subpoenas or warrants they can block." Marcus's voice hardened with resolve he hadn't felt since before Jennifer's death. "I still have contacts in the forensic accounting world, people who owe me favors, people who can access systems without leaving fingerprints. That's illegal. So is murdering children for profit." The words hung between them, marking the moment Marcus stepped across a line he'd never imagined crossing. Yesterday, he'd been a desperate father willing to risk his savings on a storage unit. Now he was planning to commit federal crimes to save his daughter's life. "Once we start this, there's no going back," Santos warned. "These people killed Elizabeth, killed Raymond, killed 3 children that we know of. They won't hesitate to kill us." Marcus looked toward Emma's bedroom one last time, thinking of plastic stars and bedtime stories, of parent-teacher conferences and birthday parties he might never see. Then he turned back to Santos with absolute certainty. "Then we better make sure we get them first." The plan fell apart within 18 hours. Marcus sat in his truck outside Data Core Systems, watching through the tinted windows as federal agents streamed through the lobby of the glass building where his contact Jake Morrison worked. The FBI windbreakers were unmistakable even from a distance, and the sight of them made his blood turn to ice water in his veins. His phone buzzed with a text from Jake. "Can't meet. Feds here asking about you. Don't contact me again." Marcus stared at the message until the words blurred, then deleted it with shaking fingers. Jake had been his best hope, a forensic data analyst who'd helped him trace corporate shell games during his accounting days, someone with both the skills and system access they needed, someone who'd agreed to help when Marcus called him at dawn, explaining just enough about Emma's situation to secure cooperation. Now Jake was probably answering questions about why Marcus Chen, disgraced former forensic accountant, had contacted him requesting illegal access to Helix Biomedical's financial records. The phone rang as Marcus pulled away from the curb. "Santos, they got to Morrison?" she asked without preamble. "How did you—" Marcus caught himself. After 25 years investigating this conspiracy, Santos probably had contacts everywhere, ways of monitoring law enforcement activity that he couldn't imagine. "Yeah. FBI's crawling all over his office. It gets worse. Dr. Hernandez called an hour ago. Emma's next treatment has been moved up." Marcus nearly swerved into oncoming traffic. "What? Why?" "Some story about scheduling conflicts, equipment availability, but the timing's too convenient." Santos's voice carried the flat certainty of someone who'd seen this pattern before. "They know we're getting close. They're accelerating Emma's timeline." "When?" "This afternoon. 2 o'clock. Marcus checked his watch. 11:30 a.m. 2.5 hours to figure out how to save his daughter's life without any of the resources they'd counted on. His hands were trembling on the steering wheel, and he had to pull over again, this time behind a strip mall where no one could see him falling apart. "Marcus, you there?" "I'm here." His voice sounded hollow, defeated. "What do we do now? Morrison was our only clean way into their financial systems. Without those records, we can't prove the money trail, can't connect Helix to the conspiracy. There might be another way." Santos hesitated. "But you're not going to like it. Tell me." "We confront them directly. Walk into Helix Biomedical and demand answers." Marcus almost laughed at the absurdity of it. "That's not a plan. That's suicide. These people killed your sister, killed Detective Walsh, killed 3 children. They're not going to confess because we ask nicely." "No, but they might make mistakes if they're pressured. People who've operated in shadow for 25 years don't always handle direct confrontation well, and while we're confronting them, Emma gets her treatment, the modified formula that's going to kill her." The silence stretched between them, heavy with all the possibilities they'd lost. Marcus thought about Raymond Walsh's meticulous evidence wall, about Elizabeth Santos's research notes, about 25 years of careful investigation that had led to this moment, and might die with them if they couldn't find another way forward. "There's something else," Santos said finally. "Something I didn't tell you last night." Marcus's stomach clenched. "What?" "I've been monitoring Emma's blood work since her treatment started. The chemical markers that indicate protocol modification, they're already present. Whatever they've been giving her, it's not Elizabeth's original formula." The words hit him like a physical blow. "For how long?" "Since the beginning. Every treatment, every injection. They've been poisoning her from day one." Marcus sat in his truck behind the strip mall, watching normal people go about their normal lives. A mother pushing a stroller, an elderly man walking his dog, teenagers laughing over coffee, and felt the last of his hope drain away. Emma hadn't been receiving miracle treatment that would turn deadly in a few weeks. She'd been receiving poison from the start, poison disguised as hope, poison he'd been grateful for. His phone buzzed again. This time it was Dr. Hernandez's office, confirming Emma's 2 p.m. appointment and requesting that Marcus arrive 30 minutes early for updated consent forms. Updated consent forms, because they were changing something about her protocol. "Santos," he said, his voice barely functional. "I think they're moving to the final stage today." "What do you mean?" "The treatment that's going to kill her. I don't think they're waiting 6 to 8 weeks anymore." Marcus started his truck, decision crystallizing through the fog of despair. "I'm going to get Emma. We're running." "Running where?" "These people have resources across 3 states, connections in federal agencies." Where can you take her that they won't find you? Marcus had no answer. He'd risked everything on a storage unit that led to a conspiracy he couldn't fight, couldn't expose, couldn't escape. His daughter was dying, and he was powerless to save her. All seemed lost. Marcus sat motionless in his truck, the engine idling while his world collapsed around him. The strip mall's ordinary life continued outside his windows. People buying groceries, picking up dry cleaning, living in a reality where fathers could actually protect their children. He envied them their ignorance. "Marcus?" Santos's voice through the phone seemed to come from underwater. "Are you still there?" He was about to answer when something caught his eye. A familiar car pulling into the parking lot. Dr. Hernandez's silver sedan, the same one he'd seen dozens of times at the hospital. But this wasn't the hospital. This was a random strip mall in Bakersfield, 15 minutes from Marcus's house. "Santos," he whispered, sliding down in his seat. "Dr. Hernandez is here." "What? Where's here?" Marcus watched as the doctor emerged from his car, but instead of heading toward any of the visible shops, he walked to the far end of the strip mall where a plain door bore only a street number. No business sign, no indication of what lay beyond. Dr. Hernandez used a keycard to enter. He just went into an unmarked office. "Same strip mall where I'm hiding." Marcus's forensic training kicked in despite his despair, cataloging details automatically. "He's not supposed to be here. This isn't on his way to anywhere from the hospital. Get the address. Now." Marcus read off the street number while something cold and analytical awakened in his mind. The timing was too precise. Emma's appointment moved up suddenly, Dr. Hernandez appearing at a secret location, FBI agents investigating his contact at the exact moment they'd tried to access Helix's financial records. "They're not just monitoring us," he said, the revelation hitting him like electricity. "They're directing us." "What do you mean?" Marcus climbed out of his truck, staying low behind other vehicles as he moved closer to the unmarked door. Through a small window, he could see part of an office interior. Computer monitors, filing cabinets, what looked like medical equipment. The storage unit, Santos. Think about it. Out of dozens of units at that auction, I bid on the one that belonged to your brother-in-law, the one containing 25 years of evidence about a conspiracy involving my daughter's treatment. Marcus crept closer, his carpenter's knowledge of building layouts helping him spot a service alley that would give him a better view. "What are the odds?" Santos was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice carried a new tension. "You think it was intentional?" "I think everything has been intentional. My job loss that forced me into carpentry, Jennifer's death that left me desperate, even Emma's cancer." Marcus reached the alley and could see through a rear window into what was clearly a medical facility. Dr. Hernandez stood beside examination tables, speaking to two people in lab coats. They didn't just target children for their experimental protocol, they created the circumstances that would make specific families vulnerable. The full scope of what he was suggesting hit him like a tsunami. Not just medical malpractice or even conspiracy, but orchestrated destruction of lives across multiple years, multiple families, all designed to create the perfect test subjects for their perverted research. "Marcus, that's impossible. They couldn't engineer." "My wife's cancer treatment." The words came out flat, certain. "Jennifer died at Regional Medical Center, same hospital network as Helix. Same doctors who referred us to Emma's experimental program when she got sick 6 months later." Through the window, Marcus watched Dr. Hernandez examine vials of what looked like blood samples. One of the lab coats handed him a tablet, pointing at data that made the doctor nod with satisfaction. "They gave Jennifer a treatment that failed," Marcus continued, the terrible logic unfolding in his mind. "Not because they couldn't save her, but because her death would create the right psychological profile in me. Desperate single father, limited options, willing to risk everything for his remaining child. And the storage unit?" Marcus thought about the auction, about his sudden decision to bid his last $10,000 on Unit 247. It had felt like impulse, like desperation driving him to a stupid gamble. Now he wondered if it had been something else entirely. "They wanted me to find Walsh's evidence." not to expose the conspiracy, but to understand exactly how trapped I am. Marcus backed away from the window as Dr. Hernandez turned toward the exit. Think about it. Every move we've made, they've been one step ahead. They neutralized my contact before we could use him. They moved up Emma's treatment when we got too close to the truth. The unmarked door opened and Dr. Hernandez emerged, but he wasn't alone. The two lab coats followed him, and Marcus could see their faces clearly now. One was Dr. Sarah Chen from the hospital's oncology department, the woman who'd first suggested Emma for the experimental program. The other was a man Marcus didn't recognize, but whose bearing screamed federal authority. "Santos," Marcus whispered. "I think I know why they're not afraid of Walsh's evidence being discovered. They wanted it discovered, by me, at exactly this moment. Why?" Marcus watched the three conspirators talk beside Dr. Hernandez's car, their body language casual, confident. People who believed they controlled every variable in their equation. But they'd made one crucial miscalculation. Because they think I'm still the broken man who lost everything and has no choice but to play by their rules. Marcus smiled grimly, feeling something harder than despair crystallizing in his chest. They don't know I've already died inside, which means I have nothing left to lose. Marcus, what are you thinking? I'm thinking, he said, starting back toward his truck with new purpose, that it's time to stop playing their game and start playing mine. Santos was quiet for a long moment after Marcus explained what he'd witnessed at the strip mall. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a steel he hadn't heard before. "You're right about one thing. They've been orchestrating this from the beginning, but that also means they've made themselves vulnerable." Marcus pulled into his driveway, noting how normal his house looked, despite everything that had shattered in the past 48 hours. Emma's bicycle still leaned against the garage door where she'd left it before her last hospital stay. The sight of it strengthened his resolve. "How do you figure?" "People who control variables from the shadows rely on their subjects not knowing they're being controlled. Now that we know, we can use their own system against them." Santos paused, and Marcus heard papers shuffling. "Meet me at the address I'm texting you, 1 hour. And Marcus, bring everything from Walsh's storage unit." The address led him to a modest house in an older Bakersfield neighborhood, the kind of place where retired teachers and civil servants lived out quiet lives. Santos answered the door before he could knock, ushering him inside with urgent efficiency. "My contact from the DA's office," she explained, gesturing toward a woman in her 60s who sat at a dining room table covered with documents. "Meet Catherine Reeves. She's been investigating Helix Biomedical from the prosecutorial side." Catherine stood, extending her hand with the firm grip of someone accustomed to courtroom battles. "Mr. Chen, I'm sorry about your daughter's situation, but I think we can help each other." Marcus set Walsh's evidence boxes on the floor, studying the materials spread across the table. Financial records, legal documents, what looked like witness statements. "How long have you been working on this?" 18 months officially, but I've been suspicious of Helix for 3 years. Catherine pulled out a chair for him. "Started when a colleague mentioned unusual patterns in pediatric mortality rates, children who should have recovered from experimental treatments, but didn't." Santos joined them at the table, spreading out Walsh's photographs alongside Catherine's documents. "Show him the financial analysis." Catherine opened a laptop, pulling up spreadsheets that made Marcus's forensic training snap to attention. Helix Biomedical isn't just a research company. They're a front for something much larger, a network of shell corporations, federal contracts, and international pharmaceutical partnerships worth hundreds of millions. "Built on dead children," Marcus said flatly. "Built on the appearance of cutting-edge research with controlled failure rates," Catherine corrected. "They needed test subjects who would respond initially to treatment, then deteriorate in specific ways. Children from desperate families who wouldn't ask too many questions when the miracle cure stopped working." Marcus studied the financial flows, recognizing the sophisticated laundering techniques he'd once specialized in exposing. Someone's been very careful about hiding money trails. This level of complexity requires institutional support. Which brings us to our advantage, Santos said, leaning forward. They've been so focused on controlling your actions that they've exposed themselves to us. Catherine nodded, pulling up a new document. The secret facility you discovered today? It's not in any official records, but the building lease traces back to a shell company owned by Helix. That's a direct connection we've never been able to establish before. More importantly, Santos added, they're rushing Emma's treatment because they think we're getting close to something that could hurt them. That means we actually are close to something. Marcus felt the first stirring of genuine hope since this nightmare began. What do you need from me? Access, Catherine said simply. As Emma's father, you have legal rights they can't completely override. Medical records, consent forms, direct communication with the research team. Things that would require warrants for us to obtain. And while you're gathering evidence from inside their system, Santos continued, we'll be coordinating with federal contacts who aren't compromised. Catherine has connections at the Justice Department who've been investigating pharmaceutical fraud independently. Marcus looked between the two women, seeing not just allies, but competent professionals who'd been fighting this battle longer than he'd known it existed. For the first time since finding Walsh's evidence, he didn't feel completely alone. There's something else, Catherine said, hesitating. The timing of Emma's accelerated treatment might actually work in our favor. If they're rushing to complete their protocol, they'll be more likely to make mistakes. Leave evidence trails they'd normally cover. What kind of evidence? Communications between researchers, unscheduled meetings, financial transfers to cover unexpected expenses. Catherine's smile carried the predatory satisfaction of an experienced prosecutor. Desperate people do sloppy work, even when they're brilliant. Santos gathered Walsh's photographs into a neat stack. Your brother-in-law spent 25 years building a case against these people. We're going to finish what he started. Marcus thought about Emma sleeping peacefully at home, trusting him to protect her, about Jennifer's death, which might not have been the random tragedy he'd believed, about all the families who'd lost children to this conspiracy. The broken man who'd bid his last $10,000 on a storage unit was gone. In his place sat someone harder, more focused, armed with allies and purpose. Tell me exactly what you need me to do. Catherine pulled out a digital recorder and placed it in the center of the table, the small device somehow making everything feel official, irreversible. First, we need you to document everything about Emma's treatment from the beginning. Every conversation with Dr. Hernandez, every consent form you signed, any changes to her protocol. Marcus nodded, his forensic training already organizing the timeline in his mind. They've been modifying her treatment since day one. Santos confirmed the blood work shows chemical markers that weren't in the original formula. That's medical fraud at minimum, Catherine said, making notes. But we need proof that goes beyond blood analysis they could claim was contaminated or misread. We need their own documentation of the modifications. Santos spread out a building schematic she'd pulled from her materials. The facility you discovered today is our way in. It's off books, which means they're conducting research there that can't be officially acknowledged. If we can get inside, find their real records, breaking and entering isn't going to hold up in court, Marcus pointed out. No, but it'll tell us what to look for through legal channels. Catherine's smile was sharp. Amazing how much evidence becomes admissible when you know exactly where to find it and can construct legitimate reasons for the search. Marcus studied the schematic, noting the building's layout, security features, access points. After months of carpentry work, reading architectural plans was second nature. This shows emergency exits here and here, service entrance in the rear. But they'll have electronic security, maybe cameras. Leave that to me, Santos said. I've been planning to get inside a Helix facility for 2 years. I just never had the right leverage before. And what leverage do we have now? Catherine leaned back, her expression turning grimmer. Emma's appointment tomorrow. They're accelerating her treatment because they think we're close to exposing them, but that also means they need her to complete their protocol before we can act. The implication hit Marcus like ice water. They're going to kill her tomorrow. Not if we move first. Santos pulled out her phone, showing him a text message thread. My Justice Department contact is standing by with federal agents. The moment we have solid evidence of the conspiracy, they can move on Helix simultaneously across all their locations. But we only get one chance, Catherine warned. If we tip our hand too early, they'll destroy evidence and disappear. Emma won't be the only child who dies. There are dozens of others in their experimental programs across the country. Marcus felt the weight of it settling on his shoulders. Not just his daughter's life, but the lives of children whose parents were sitting in hospital waiting rooms right now, trusting the same doctors who'd been slowly poisoning their kids for profit. What's the timeline? Tonight, Santos and I go into the facility, Catherine said. We document everything we can find, establish the evidence trail. Tomorrow morning you take Emma to her appointment as scheduled. You want me to deliver her to them? We want you to be inside their system when the federal raid happens, Santos corrected, with Emma safely under protective custody and you wearing a wire to document whatever they say when they realize they're caught. Marcus thought about Emma waking up that morning, trusting him to take her for treatment that would help her feel better. The idea of walking her into that building knowing what he knew made his stomach clench, but the alternative was worse. There's something else, he said, remembering the federal agent he'd seen with Dr. Hernandez. They have someone inside law enforcement, maybe multiple someones. How do we know your Justice Department contact isn't compromised? Catherine and Santos exchanged glances, and Marcus saw his own fears reflected in their expressions. Don't, Catherine admitted. But we know the local FBI is compromised because they moved on your bank contact too quickly. Federal prosecutors operate differently, with more autonomy. It's our best shot. And if you're wrong, then we improvise. Santos's voice carried the flat certainty of someone who'd already lost everything that mattered. My sister is dead, Marcus. Your wife is dead. Neither of us has anything left to lose except Emma and the other children still in their system. Marcus stood, pacing to the window where he could see normal families in normal houses living normal lives. Tomorrow night, either Emma would be safe and the conspiracy exposed, or they'd all be dead and the killing would continue. One more thing, he said, turning back to face them. Walsh's evidence included financial records showing payments to families of children who died in the program, survivor benefits, educational funds, even mortgage payments. Marcus met Catherine's eyes. They're not just killing these kids for research, they're buying the silence of grieving parents. Catherine's face went white. How many families? Dozens, maybe hundreds over 25 years. Marcus felt the full scope of the conspiracy crystallizing. We're not just stopping a medical experiment, we're bringing down a murder syndicate. The room fell silent except for the ticking of an old mantel clock. Finally, Santos gathered Walsh's evidence into neat stacks. Then we better not fail. Marcus stared at the evidence boxes for a long moment, feeling the weight of 25 years of Detective Walsh's obsession pressing down on him. Tomorrow night this would all be over, one way or another. I need to see Emma before we do this, he said finally. If something goes wrong. Catherine nodded. You should. But Marcus, don't tell her anything. Children pick up on fear, and we can't risk her acting differently tomorrow. The drive home felt surreal, like traveling between two different worlds. In one world, he was Marcus Chen the carpenter, taking his sick daughter for routine medical treatment. In the other, he was about to help expose a decades-long conspiracy that had already claimed his wife's life. Emma was awake when he entered her room, propped up against pillows and reading one of her fantasy novels. The sight of her, pale but alert, still fighting, strengthened his resolve. How are you feeling, sweetheart? Tired, but okay. She bookmarked her page and studied his face with the unsettling perceptiveness that had always made her seem older than 8. You look worried. Is it about tomorrow? Marcus sat on the edge of her bed, choosing his words carefully. The doctors want to try something new with your treatment. It might feel different than usual. Different how? I'm not sure yet, but I'll be there with you the whole time, okay? Whatever happens, I'm not going anywhere. Emma reached for his hand, her small fingers surprisingly strong. Dad? Are you scared? The question hit him harder than he'd expected. In all the months of hospital visits and treatments, he'd worked so hard to project confidence, to be the strong parent she needed. But tonight, sitting in her room with Walsh's evidence burning in his mind, maintaining that facade felt impossible. Yeah, he admitted, I am scared. But sometimes being brave doesn't mean not being scared. It means doing what needs to be done, even when you're terrified. Like when you bid on that storage unit. Marcus blinked, surprised. You remember that? You thought I was asleep in the truck, but I heard you talking to yourself. You kept saying it was crazy, but you did it anyway. Emma squeezed his hand. Because you thought it might help me. That's right. And it did help. Somehow. Her voice carried a certainty that made his chest tight. I don't understand how, but I can feel it. Things are going to change tomorrow. Marcus kissed her forehead, tasting the salt of tears he hadn't realized he was shedding. Get some sleep, Em. Tomorrow's going to be a big day. After she dozed off, Marcus returned to his kitchen and spread Walsh's core evidence across the table one final time. Photos of crime scenes, financial records, maps marking locations across 3 states. The obsessive work of a man who'd sacrificed everything to chase a truth too big for him to handle alone. But Walsh had been alone. Marcus wasn't. His phone buzzed with a text from Santos. Insertion. At 2 a.m. radio silence until morning briefing. Marcus typed back, understood. See you on the other side. He spent the next hour going through Emma's medical records, documenting every discrepancy between what Dr. Hernandez had promised and what had actually been administered. His forensic training helped him spot the patterns, subtle changes in dosages, introduction of unidentified compounds, treatment modifications that coincided with Emma's periods of improvement followed by decline. They'd been experimenting on her from the very beginning, fine-tuning their protocol using her body as a laboratory. The rage that thought triggered was clean and cold, burning away the last vestiges of the desperate man who'd stumbled into this conspiracy by accident. That man had been reactive, always one step behind. Tomorrow, Marcus would be something different. At midnight, he gathered all the evidence and secured it in a safety deposit box at a 24-hour bank branch, keeping only copies for the morning's operation. If something happened to him, Catherine would know where to find Walsh's complete files. Back home, Marcus sat in his darkened living room and thought about Jennifer, about the cancer treatment that had failed so conveniently, creating the perfect psychological profile for their daughter's recruitment into the experimental program, about the job loss that had pushed him into financial desperation just when Emma got sick. None of it had been random. They'd been orchestrating his family's destruction for years, positioning him like a chess piece for this exact moment. But they'd made one crucial error in their calculations. They thought they were controlling a broken man who would do anything to save his daughter. What they'd actually created was someone who'd already lost everything that mattered except Emma. Someone with nothing left to lose and every reason to burn their conspiracy to the ground. Marcus checked his watch, 1:47 a.m. Santos and Catherine would be approaching the facility now, beginning the endgame that would determine whether his daughter lived or died. He closed his eyes and felt Detective Walsh's presence like a weight on his shoulders. 25 years of patient investigation, all building toward tomorrow morning when Marcus would walk Emma into that hospital and face the people who'd murdered his wife. The final test was beginning, and Marcus Chen was ready. Marcus's phone exploded with vibrations at 6:23 a.m., jarring him from the restless half-sleep he'd managed in his kitchen chair. 3 missed calls from Santos, 2 from Catherine, and a string of texts that made his blood freeze. But facility compromised. They knew we were coming. Catherine in custody. Cover blown. Abort, abort, abort. His hands shook as he dialed Santos back, but the call went straight to voicemail. The silence that followed felt like falling off a cliff. Emma appeared in the kitchen doorway, already dressed for her appointment, her small backpack slung over her shoulder. "Dad, is it time to go?" Marcus stared at his daughter, his mind racing through rapidly collapsing options. Santos and Catherine were gone. The federal contact might be compromised. The entire plan had crumbled before dawn, leaving him alone with a choice that felt like standing at the edge of an abyss. Take Emma to the hospital as scheduled and hope he could somehow protect her without backup, or disappear with her and spend the rest of their lives running from people with unlimited resources and federal connections. "Dad?" Emma's voice carried a note of concern. "You're scaring me." Marcus forced himself to breathe, to think like the forensic accountant he'd once been, instead of the panicked father he was now. The evidence was secured. Walsh's files were documented. Even if Santos and Catherine were captured, the truth was still out there. But Emma's appointment was in 2 hours, and every instinct screamed that walking into that hospital was a death sentence. His phone rang again. Dr. Hernandez. "Mr. Chen? I wanted to confirm that Emma is still coming in this morning. We've made some special arrangements for her treatment today." The careful emphasis on special sent ice through Marcus's veins. They knew he knew. This wasn't about medical treatment anymore. It was about elimination. "Of course," Marcus heard himself say. "We'll be there." "Excellent. And Mr. Chen, please use the Maple Street entrance today instead of the main lobby. We're having some construction work done." The line went dead. Marcus stared at the phone, recognizing the tactical precision of an execution disguised as medical care. Isolated entrance, controlled environment, no witnesses. "Dad, what's wrong?" Emma was studying his face with that unsettling perceptiveness again. Something changed, didn't it? Marcus knelt beside her, taking her hands in his. For the first time since finding Walsh's evidence, he looked directly into his daughter's eyes and told her the truth. "Em, the people who are supposed to be helping you get better, they're not good people. They've been hurting you instead." Emma's expression didn't show surprise, just a quiet sadness that made Marcus's heart crack. "I know, Dad. I've known for a while. You..." "What?" "The medicine makes me feel worse, not better. And the nurses whisper about me when they think I'm sleeping." Emma's voice remained steady, matter-of-fact. "I heard them say I was responding within parameters after my last treatment. That doesn't sound like getting better." Marcus pulled her into his arms, feeling the fragility of her small frame and the strength of her spirit in the same moment. His 8-year-old daughter had been fighting this battle longer than he'd known it existed. "We're not going to the hospital today," he said. "We're going somewhere else." "Where?" Marcus thought about the federal agent he'd seen with Dr. Hernandez, about Santos and Catherine in custody, about the vast network of corruption that had murdered his wife and was now reaching for his daughter. There was nowhere to run, that they wouldn't eventually find them. But there was one place they wouldn't expect him to go. "We're going to finish what Detective Walsh started." Marcus grabbed Walsh's evidence copies and his laptop, his mind already formulating a plan born of desperation and fury. If Santos and Catherine's approach had failed, if law enforcement was compromised, if the federal system was corrupted, then he'd take the evidence directly to the one place they couldn't control, the media. 20 minutes later, Marcus and Emma sat in the parking lot outside Channel 7 News, watching early morning staff arrive for work. Marcus had already identified the investigative reporter whose exposés on pharmaceutical companies had won national awards. "Are you sure about this?" Emma asked quietly. Marcus looked at his daughter, pale, sick, but alive and fighting, and thought about Detective Walsh spending 25 years gathering evidence for a moment exactly like this one, about Jennifer's death, about all the families who'd lost children to this conspiracy. "Sometimes being brave means doing what needs to be done, even when you're terrified," he said, echoing his words from the night before. Emma nodded solemnly. "Then let's go be brave." Together, they walked toward the building that would either save her life or become their final battlefield. The newsroom of Channel 7 buzzed with morning energy as Marcus and Emma approached the receptionist's desk. Marcus clutched the manila folder containing Walsh's evidence, his heart hammering against his ribs. Behind him, Emma's small hand found his, her palm surprisingly steady. "We need to speak with Janet Reeves," Marcus told the receptionist, naming the investigative journalist he'd researched. "It's about a story involving pharmaceutical fraud and murdered children." The receptionist's eyebrows rose, but she picked up her phone. Within minutes, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s emerged from the elevator, her press badge identifying her as Janet Reeves. "Mr. Chen, Marcus Chen, this is my daughter Emma." He opened the folder, revealing photographs of crime scenes and Walsh's meticulous documentation. 25 years ago, Detective Raymond Walsh disappeared while investigating a serial killer. What he actually found was a conspiracy that's been murdering children for medical research. "They killed my wife, they're killing my daughter, and they're about to kill us both unless you help expose them." Janet's expression shifted from professional skepticism to sharp interest as she scanned the documents. "Follow me." They rode the elevator in tense silence to the newsroom's investigative unit, a glass-walled office overlooking the main floor. Janet closed the door and activated a white noise machine. "Talk fast," she said, setting up a recording device. "If what you're claiming is true, we don't have much time." Marcus spread Walsh's evidence across the conference table, his forensic training taking over as he walked through the conspiracy's structure. Financial records showing payments to bereaved families, medical documents proving systematic poisoning disguised as treatment, maps connecting 13 unsolved murders across 3 states. "Helix Medical has been running experimental protocols on terminally ill children," Marcus explained, his voice gaining strength as he outlined the case. "They create the illnesses, provide the treatment, and harvest genetic data from the victims. Parents like me become so desperate, we'll sign any consent form, agree to any procedure." Emma sat quietly beside him, occasionally adding details about her treatment that made Janet's face grow paler. The 8-year-old's clinical descriptions of being given medications that made her worse, of overhearing conversations about her blood work being within acceptable parameters, carried a devastating authenticity. "The federal investigation was compromised," Marcus continued. "2 people trying to help us were arrested last night. We have maybe hours before they track us down." Janet studied the financial records, her journalist's instincts clearly engaged. "These payment authorizations, I recognize some of these names. Families who lost children to rare cancers, autoimmune disorders." She looked up sharply. "We covered several of these cases. The medical company always provided grief counseling and financial support afterward. We thought it was corporate responsibility." "It was hush money," Marcus said flatly. "They'd been perfecting this system for decades." Janet's phone buzzed. She glanced at it and her expression hardened. "3 black SUVs just pulled into our parking garage. They're moving fast." Marcus felt the trap closing around them. Through the glass walls, he could see the newsroom's normal activity continuing, reporters and producers unaware that federal agents were probably already in the building. "How long do you need?" he asked Janet. "To verify this evidence and prepare a story?" "Days, maybe weeks." "We don't have days." Emma tugged on Marcus's sleeve. "Dad, what if we don't run?" "What do you mean, sweetheart?" "They want to stop us from telling the truth, right?" Emma's voice carried a calm certainty that reminded Marcus of her mother. "But if we tell it right now, to everyone at once, they can't stop it anymore." Marcus stared at his daughter, understanding flooding through him. "Live broadcast." Janet caught on immediately. "Our morning show goes live in 20 minutes, but the legal department will never approve." "Then don't ask them." Marcus gathered Walsh's most damning evidence, photographs of children who died, financial records proving the conspiracy, medical documents showing the systematic poisoning protocol. "How long would you need to present this evidence on air?" 10 minutes. Maybe 15 if I can get the anchors to ask the right questions. Janet was already moving, her professional instincts overriding caution. But Marcus, if I do this, there's no going back. For any of us. There's already no going back, Marcus said quietly. He looked at Emma, seeing Jennifer's courage reflected in their daughter's eyes. Em, if we do this, they'll try to hurt us. They might separate us. They're going to hurt us anyway, Dad. At least this way, other kids won't get hurt too. The sacrifice crystallized in Marcus's mind with devastating clarity. To save Emma's life, he had to risk losing her. To expose the conspiracy, he had to make them both targets. The cost of victory wasn't just his safety or his freedom, it was the last precious weeks or months he might have had with his daughter before the poison in her system completed its work. But Emma was right. Other children were suffering in hospital rooms across the country, their parents signing consent forms for treatments that would kill them. Other families would face the same choice Marcus had faced in that storage unit parking lot. Desperation driving them into the hands of monsters. Marcus squeezed Emma's hand and made his choice. Let's do it. Janet's fingers flew across her keyboard as she pulled up the morning show's rundown, her years of breaking investigative stories overriding every protocol. Through the glass walls, Marcus could see security guards moving purposefully through the newsroom below. Not the building's usual personnel. They're already here, he said quietly. Then we go live now. Janet grabbed the evidence files and stood. Morning shows in Studio A. I can interrupt the weather segment, claim breaking news. She looked at Marcus and Emma with the sharp intensity of someone who'd built a career on exposing dangerous truths. Once we're on air, they can't touch us without creating an incident. The feed goes to 3 states. Marcus lifted Emma, feeling how light she'd become, how the months of systematic poisoning had eaten away at her strength. But her eyes remained fierce, determined. You ready for this, Em? I've been ready since I figured out they were hurting me instead of helping. Emma's voice carried a steel that reminded him so powerfully of Jennifer it took his breath away. Let's stop them, Dad. They moved through the newsroom like a small army, Janet clearing the path with her press credentials and reputation. Marcus caught glimpses of confusion on faces as they passed. Producers recognizing something momentous was happening, but not understanding what. Studio A hummed with the controlled chaos of live television. The morning anchors, Sarah Chen and David Martinez, were in the middle of the weather segment when Janet appeared at the anchor desk with Marcus and Emma flanked beside her. Sarah, David, we need to interrupt, Janet said, her voice cutting through the studio's careful calm. Breaking investigative story. Federal emergency. Sarah Chen's professional instincts kicked in immediately. We're live in 30 seconds. She told her producers through her earpiece, then looked directly at Janet. What do you have? A conspiracy involving murdered children, pharmaceutical fraud, and federal law enforcement corruption. Janet spread Walsh's photographs across the anchor desk as the camera operators scrambled to adjust their angles. 25 years of evidence that's been suppressed. The red light on camera 2 blazed to life. Good morning, I'm Sarah Chen. We're interrupting our regular programming with breaking news from our investigative unit. Janet Reeves is here with what she's calling a federal emergency. Sarah's voice carried the gravity of someone who understood she was about to broadcast something that would change everything. Janet? Marcus watched Janet transform into the journalist who'd won awards for exposing corruption, her voice clear and authoritative as she held up Walsh's crime scene photographs. 25 years ago, Detective Raymond Walsh disappeared while investigating what appeared to be a serial killer. What he actually uncovered was a systematic conspiracy by Helix Medical Corporation to murder children for genetic research. Janet's words cut through the studio like gunfire. The evidence shows they've been creating terminal illnesses in children, providing experimental treatments that actually accelerate death, and harvesting biological data from the victims. David Martinez leaned forward, his anchor training helping him process the enormity of what he was hearing. These are extremely serious allegations, Janet. What evidence supports this? Janet lifted the financial records, her camera operator zooming in on the payment authorizations. These documents show Helix Medical providing substantial payments to families after their children died in treatment. The payments are disguised as grief counseling and memorial funds, but the pattern is unmistakable. 13 children across 3 states, all with rare blood disorders, all treated with the same experimental protocol, all dead within 6 months. Marcus felt Emma's hand squeeze his as Janet continued building the case on live television, each piece of evidence landing like a hammer blow. In the control room, he could see producers frantically making phone calls, but the story was already out there, flowing through cable networks and internet feeds. "With me is Marcus Chen and his daughter Emma," Janet continued, the camera widening to include them. "Emma is currently being treated by Helix Medical for acute leukemia. Mr. Chen discovered this evidence in a storage unit that belonged to Detective Walsh." Sarah Chen's expression had shifted from professional curiosity to something approaching horror as she absorbed the implications. "Emma, can you tell us about your treatment?" Emma looked directly into the camera with the poise of someone far older than 8 years. "The medicine they give me makes me sicker, not better. The doctors talk about me like I'm not there. They say things like, within acceptable parameters when my blood work comes back." Her small voice carried across the studio with devastating clarity. "They're not trying to cure me, they're studying me while I die." The studio fell into the kind of silence that occurs when something unthinkable becomes undeniably real. Marcus could see the technical crew exchanging glances, understanding they were witnessing something historic and terrible. Janet held up the final piece of evidence, Detective Walsh's map marking locations where children had died. "This conspiracy reaches into federal law enforcement. 2 people trying to expose this were arrested last night. Federal agents are currently in this building attempting to stop this broadcast." As if summoned by her words, Marcus saw men in dark suits appearing at the studio's entrance, their faces grim with purpose. But the red lights on all 3 cameras remained steady, the truth already streaming to hundreds of thousands of viewers who would soon become millions. The resolution had begun, the return. The federal agents reached the studio doors just as Sarah Chen addressed the camera with the gravity of someone delivering a verdict. "We're going to continue broadcasting this story until we're physically prevented from doing so. What you're seeing is potentially the largest medical conspiracy in US history." Marcus watched through the glass as the agents spoke rapidly into their radios, their faces tight with frustration. They couldn't storm a live television studio without creating the exact spectacle they were trying to prevent. The truth was already spreading across social media, news websites picking up the feed, other stations scrambling to verify and expand the story. "Dad," Emma whispered, tugging on his sleeve, "look at your phone." Marcus glanced down to see dozens of missed calls, text messages flooding in. The numbers he recognized made his heart race. Other parents from the pediatric ward, families who'd lost children to rare cancers, people who'd been isolated in their grief suddenly understanding they weren't alone. Watching Channel 7, "Emma's so brave. They did the same thing to Michael. We have medical records that match yours. Dr. Hernandez treated Sarah before she died. Thank you for speaking up. Finally, someone believes us." The conspiracy's greatest weapon had been silence, keeping families separated in their suffering. But Emma's voice on live television had shattered that isolation. Marcus could see the network crumbling in real time as parents across 3 states began connecting dots they'd been forced to leave scattered. Janet was showing Walsh's photographs now, explaining how the detective had tracked the pattern of deaths across state lines. Each of these children received the same experimental protocol. Each family received the same grief counseling and financial settlement. Each death was classified as natural causes, despite evidence of systematic poisoning. Through the studio monitors, Marcus could see news vans arriving in the parking lot, other media outlets racing to catch up to the story. The federal agents who'd come to suppress the truth were now trapped by the very attention they'd tried to prevent. Emma straightened in her chair, looking directly into the camera again. If you're a kid getting treatments that make you feel worse, tell someone. If your doctors talk about you like you're not there, that's not normal. You deserve to get better, not be an experiment. Marcus felt something fundamental shift in that moment. For months, he'd watched his daughter shrink under the weight of her illness, becoming smaller and quieter as the poison masqueraded as medicine. But sitting in that television studio, speaking truth to power, Emma was becoming herself again. Fierce, protective, uncompromisingly brave. Mr. Chen, David Martinez addressed him directly. What do you want people watching this to know? Marcus looked at the camera, thinking about Detective Walsh spending 25 years alone with this terrible knowledge, about Jennifer dying without understanding why her body was failing, about all the families who'd trusted doctors who were actually killers. Check your medical records. Ask questions about experimental protocols. If your child's treatment is making them sicker, trust your instincts. Marcus's voice grew stronger with each word, and if someone in authority tells you to stay quiet about your child's suffering, that's when you should speak the loudest. The studio doors opened, but instead of federal agents, Marcus saw uniformed police officers, local law enforcement, their faces grim but determined. Behind them came a woman Marcus recognized from television, District Attorney Patricia Wong, her expression suggesting she'd been waiting years for this moment. We have warrants for the arrest of Dr. Elena Hernandez and 17 other individuals connected to Helix Medical, De Wong announced to the cameras, clearly understanding the power of broadcasting her words live. Based on evidence provided by Mr. Chen and corroborated by our investigation, we're also executing search warrants at Helix facilities across the state. Marcus felt Emma's hand slip into his as they watched the criminal justice system finally respond to Walsh's evidence. But the real victory wasn't in the arrests or search warrants. It was in the message board comments streaming across the studio monitors, parents sharing their stories, medical professionals coming forward with their own evidence, a conspiracy of silence collapsing under the weight of collective truth. Dad, Emma said quietly, I feel different. Different? How? Like I'm not alone anymore. Like fighting back is making me stronger. Emma smiled with an expression Marcus hadn't seen since before her diagnosis. Not the careful optimism of someone trying to be brave, but the genuine confidence of someone who'd found her power. Marcus realized he felt it too. For the first time since Jennifer's death, since the storage unit auction, since the crushing weight of choosing between his daughter's life and the truth, he wasn't afraid. They'd walked into the heart of the conspiracy and emerged not as victims, but as the people who'd torn it down. The story was just beginning, but the silence was over forever. The new beginning. 6 months later, Marcus stood in the same hospital corridor where he'd once felt helpless, but everything had changed. The walls that once seemed to close in around him now felt open, filled with the sounds of genuine healing rather than orchestrated suffering. Emma walked beside him, not the fragile child he'd carried through these halls, but a girl whose strength had returned with proper treatment, whose laughter echoed off the sterile surfaces like a declaration of victory. Mr. Chen? Dr. Sarah Kim approached with Emma's latest blood work, her smile genuine in a way that Marcus had learned to recognize after months of deception. The results are remarkable. Complete remission, and her immune system is stronger than we've seen in any recovery case. Emma bounced slightly on her toes, the motion so natural and healthy that Marcus felt his throat tighten with gratitude. Can I see other kids now, the ones who just started treatment? Dr. Kim nodded. Room 314 has a little boy who's been asking about the girl from television. I think he'd love to meet you. As Emma skipped down the hallway, actually skipped, something Marcus had thought he might never see again, he reflected on the transformation that had begun in that television studio. The Helix medical conspiracy had unraveled completely, with Dr. Hernandez and her colleagues now awaiting trial for what federal prosecutors called the largest medical fraud and homicide case in U.S. history. But more importantly, the silence had been broken forever. The storage unit that had changed everything now sat empty. Marcus had donated Detective Walsh's evidence to the FBI, but not before making copies that he'd given to families across 3 states. Parents who finally understood why their children had died, who could now grieve with answers instead of questions. The unit's contents had traveled full circle, from Walsh's desperate investigation to Marcus's impossible choice to Emma's brave voice on live television. Marcus's phone buzzed with a text from Janet Reeves. Emma's interview with 60 Minutes confirmed. They want to discuss the new foundation. The Emma Chen Foundation for Medical Transparency had grown from the aftermath of their broadcast, funded by donations from families who'd been victimized by similar schemes and supported by medical professionals determined to prevent future conspiracies. Emma had insisted on being involved in every decision, her 8-year-old perspective cutting through adult complications with devastating clarity. "Dad!" Emma's voice called from room 314. "Come meet Tommy. His doctors are good ones, but he's scared about the needles." Marcus found his daughter sitting cross-legged on the hospital bed beside a 6-year-old boy with the same hollow eyes Emma had once carried. But where Marcus remembered feeling powerless in these moments, he now saw opportunity, the chance to transform fear into understanding, isolation into connection. "The needles are the worst part," Emma was explaining seriously to Tommy. "But you know what? When they're actually trying to help you, your body starts feeling better, even when the medicine tastes gross. If you ever feel like the medicine is making you sicker instead of better, you tell everyone. You tell your parents, you tell other doctors, you tell everyone until someone listens." Tommy nodded solemnly, and Marcus recognized the moment when a frightened child became an empowered patient. These conversations were happening in hospital rooms across the country now, Emma's television appearance having created a network of informed families who refused to suffer in silence. Walking home through Bakersfield's evening light, Emma's hand warm in his, Marcus thought about the man he'd been 6 months ago. Desperate, isolated, willing to risk everything on a storage unit auction because he'd run out of options. That version of himself felt like someone from another lifetime, someone who'd believed the world was divided into victims and victimizers, with no possibility of fighting back. "Dad, do you miss the old house?" Emma asked as they reached their new apartment, smaller but filled with light from windows that actually opened. "Do you?" Emma considered this seriously, her face thoughtful in the way that reminded him daily of Jennifer. "I miss Mom being there, but I don't miss feeling sick all the time or being scared that the doctors were lying." She looked up at him with eyes that held both childhood wonder and hard-earned wisdom. "I like who we are now. We're not scared anymore." Marcus realized she was right. The fear that had driven every decision for over a year, fear of losing Emma, fear of financial ruin, fear of authorities he couldn't challenge, had been replaced by something more powerful. Not the absence of fear, but the knowledge that they could face whatever came next together, as people who'd walked into the darkness and emerged stronger. As they climbed the stairs to their apartment, Emma chattering about the Foundation's newest project to audit pediatric treatment protocols nationwide, Marcus understood that Detective Walsh's evidence had done more than expose a conspiracy. It had given them back their voices, their power, their future. The silence was broken, the truth was spreading, and Emma was home,